The wind howled across the Yukon, the storm ferocious in its intensity. Snowflakes, sharp as glass, whipped against the windows of the small cabin like 1,000 tiny arrows. Inside, the only light came from a flickering fire in the hearth, casting long shadows across the rugged furniture. Alex Carter, a grizzled wildlife photographer, sat hunched over a worn wooden table, organizing his gear. His fingers were steady, but his mind wasn't. The silence of the cabin felt oppressive, filled with memories he couldn't shake. A personal loss still haunted him, an empty space in his heart that seemed to grow every day. He paused, eyes drawn to the frost-covered window where the night storm seemed endless. The harsh wind made the trees outside tremble, their skeletal branches creaking as if protesting the cold. Alex turned his gaze toward the wall opposite the window, where a fresh set of claw marks marred the surface of the nearest tree. He hadn't noticed them earlier that day, but now they stood out stark against the pale snow. A shiver ran down his spine, not from the cold but from a deep, primal instinct. Something was out there. Something close. The storm raged on, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't as alone as he thought. Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. Today, I'm excited to share a new story with you. Please subscribe us. The storm outside had intensified, the howl of the wind now deafening, drowning out any sound of nature. But then, there was a soft scratching against the cabin's wooden door, faint but insistent. Alex's heart skipped a beat. His eyes flicked nervously toward the door as the sound continued, slower now, rhythmic in its pattern. Was it a bear? A wolf? Or something more desperate? He rose from the table, his boots creaking on the wooden floor. Cautiously, he approached the door, holding his breath. Another scratch, this time louder, sharper. Whatever it wasn't giving up. He hesitated, gripping the doorknob with trembling fingers. There was something unnatural about the sound. This wasn't the usual animal clawing for attention. Alex cracked the door open just a sliver. A freezing gust of wind blasted into the room, stinging his face, but it was the sight outside that stopped him cold. The snowstorm had grown worse, but amid the swirling white, a shape emerged, large, feline, its thick fur caked in frost. The lynx stood frozen in the snow, her golden eyes locked onto his with an intensity that was both hypnotic and unnerving. The lynx's presence was imposing, majestic, even, her coat gleaming faintly in the dim light, though the icy frost made her appear like a ghost in the storm. She didn't move, not at first. Alex felt a chill run down his spine as her amber eyes held his gaze. It was as if the wild creature could see right through him, reading his every thought, every fear. But then his eyes fell to the two cubs, one of which lay motionless in the snow beside her, its small form nearly buried beneath the drifts. The other cub trembled violently, struggling to stay conscious, its little body racked with tiny, shallow breaths. The mother's gaze never wavered from Alex, her eyes now full of something Alex could barely comprehend, desperation. The lynx shifted slightly, dragging the lifeless cub closer to the door, her movements slow and deliberate. For a moment, she hesitated, her head turning to glance at the threshold, as though weighing the danger of what she was about to do. The wind howled around them, but all Alex could hear was the quiet shudder of the cub's breath, the soft scrape of claws on wood. She pawed gently at the door, a soft tap that echoed in the stillness of the cabin. The sound was unmistakable, a plea. Alex's breath caught in his throat as he stood frozen, his heart pounding in his ears. His mind raced. This wasn't normal. No wild animal approached humans like this. A lynx didn't come knocking at your door, begging for help. And yet, here she was. He could feel the weight of her stare, the unspoken trust in those amber eyes. The situation felt unreal, too surreal to be true. Should he let her in? Should he risk his safety for these creatures? His hand hovered over the door handle, but he didn't move. Memories flooded back to him, images of a time when his life was different. A time when he was surrounded by family, warmth, and laughter. His wife, Sarah, and their daughter, Emily, had been part of his world, until the accident. The cold silence of their absence had settled in his heart, but it was nothing compared to the biting cold outside. Could he risk letting the lynx in? Would he be putting himself in danger, or worse, would he be condemning them to a harsher fate by doing nothing? But then he thought of the cub, so small, so fragile, and he knew there was only one choice. He opened the door wider, stepping back just enough to let the wind blast into the cabin. The mother lynx, still eyeing him intently, took a tentative step forward. She nudged the limp cub closer, her eyes locked on his with a quiet but urgent plea. Alex felt his heart tighten. He couldn't ignore this. Not again. With a deep, shaky breath, he stepped back and opened the door fully, the cold seeping into his bones. The lynx gently nudged her cub inside, her movements careful yet determined. The little creature barely managed to stagger inside, collapsing onto the wooden floor with a pitiful sound. Alex quickly closed the door behind them, the warmth of the cabin mixing with the sudden weight of the decision he had just made. The mother lynx lingered just inside the door, her body tense, her gaze unwavering. Alex's eyes flicked to the cub she had nudged in, its small form trembling uncontrollably on the floor, its limbs barely moving. The other cub was curled in the snow just outside, still too weak to follow. The mother's golden eyes met Alex's again, her silent plea clear. She didn't move, waiting, watching, as if testing his intentions. Alex took a slow step toward the cub that had made it inside. He knelt by its side, his breath shallow as he assessed the tiny creature's condition. It was cold to the touch, its fur damp with melted snow and frost, its body stiff from the cold. He quickly pulled a blanket from the nearby shelf, wrapping it around the cub as gently as he could. But that wasn't enough. He needed warmth. Hurrying to the stove, Alex grabbed a couple of towels, folding them into a makeshift heating pad. He placed them under the blanket, checking the cub's pulse as his heart thudded in his chest. It was faint but there. The cub was still alive. From the corner of his eye, Alex saw the mother lynx take a few careful steps forward. Her eyes were fixated on him, but there was something different now, a hesitant curiosity. She lowered her head, sniffing the cub, her body language both protective and cautious. She didn't make a sound, but her presence was unmistakable, as if she were waiting for Alex to prove his worthiness to care for her young. Alex worked quickly but carefully, draping the blanket over the cub's body, ensuring it was nestled close to the warmth of the stove. His hands shook as he worked, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Outside, the storm raged with renewed fury, the wind battering the cabin's walls as if to remind them of the danger still outside. Alex knew that if the mother and cubs were to leave now, they would never make it through the storm. The temperature had plummeted, the snow piling higher by the minute. But still, the mother lynx didn't move. She stayed close, her amber eyes flickering from Alex to the cub. With a soft, low growl, she began to lick the cub, her tongue rough but gentle, working to warm it, to comfort it. She kept her wary eyes on Alex, but the trust was there, unspoken yet palpable. For a moment, the storm seemed to fall away. Alex felt the tension in his chest release just a little. The cub was still alive, and maybe, just maybe, they would make it through the night. The storm outside had finally begun to subside. As dawn's first light filtered weakly through the frost-covered windows, Alex exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The howling winds had softened to a distant rumble, leaving only the gentle crackling of the fire and the rhythmic sound of the lynx's low growl as she tended to her cubs. Sunlight, pale and fractured by the snow, began to spill across the floor in thin beams. It illuminated the mother lynx, still curled protectively around her cubs. For the first time, Alex noticed how deeply the storm had affected them, not just physically, but in the way they had bonded with him during the night. The mother lynx, now calmer than she had been when she first entered the cabin, glanced at Alex before cautiously stepping toward the bowl of water he had set by the hearth. She sniffed it, her amber eyes never leaving him, and then, with a tentative grace, lowered her head to drink. Alex watched in awe, the weight of the moment sinking in as she allowed him into her world, even if only for a fleeting time. As the cubs began to stir, their tiny bodies now stronger, they ventured a few steps away from the warmth of the fire. The smaller cub let out a soft mew before darting across the floor, its siblings following closely behind. For the first time in what felt like forever, the room was filled with playful sounds, tiny paws tapping across the wooden floor, chasing after each other with wobbly steps. The contrast was stark, the tension from the previous night melting into a warmth that Alex couldn't quite describe. There was hope now, where there had been none. The mother lynx slowly rose, stretching her limbs with graceful movements. She nudged her cubs, now fully alert and stronger, toward the door. They hesitated, peering back at the warmth of the cabin before stepping toward the threshold. The mother paused, her gaze locking with Alex's. For a long moment, her amber eyes seemed to convey a deep, silent gratitude, a bond formed in the quiet moments of shared survival. Alex stood at the door, watching as the Lynx family stepped out into the still snowy wilderness. As they vanished into the distance, a quiet sense of peace settled over him. He wasn't alone anymore. If this story touched your heart, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.